guys, I'm Jacqueline Zacharias. Today I want to share with you 5 tips on how to improve your riding immediately. All right, let's get started. So one of the main things that I see people do so often, and I think this is one of the things that I correct the most when teaching students, when giving lessons, is sitting back on your pocket. So often when I tell people sit back, then they'll kind of do this and they brace and they're still locked up in the hips and they'll kind of lean back, but you can tell everything through here is still really locked up and they're not actually sitting back comfortably in the seat of that saddle. So what I tell people is sit on your pockets. I want you to kind of roll your spine under you just a little bit. Good boy. Took that as a little bit of a stop cue. I want you to roll your spine under you a little bit, get your back straight and aligned, and sit on your pockets like this to where your hips are rolling with that horse. I don't want to see this right here where you're locked up through the hips. You really want to lean forward and get over yourself. You're riding on your crotch, but you're trying to pull your shoulders back, all right? So sit on your pockets, tuck your seat under you, and ride like this. It's a lot more comfortable. You could stay seated a lot better, and when you go into a jog or a lope, that's much easier to ride as well. Let me give you an example really quick. Bring him up to a jog here. This horse has about 60 days on him. He's not really finished or anything, but I figured I'd knock out a ride and a video both in one. So you can see right here where I'm sitting on my pocket, it's so much easier for me to stay in that saddle and just kind of ride this trot. This horse is not a very smooth horse, but to me it feels just fine, and that's because when you ride this way, your spine can absorb a lot more of that energy versus if you sit up like this. Not only does it look a lot less pretty, but it's also a lot more difficult and uncomfortable for the rider. All right, bring him back here. Okay, the next one I want to bring up is keeping your heels down, okay? This one, again, is overlooked a lot. I don't actually hear people bring it up as much as they need to. I think it's something that's mentioned a lot more in the English world than in the Western world, but it needs to be addressed in the Western riding as well. And the reason being is that what I see people often do is that they want to brace on these stirrups. They want to put a lot of weight on the balls of their feet, or they want to kind of point their toes down. It kind of goes along with that whole thing about locking up in the hips. Our natural tendency when we lack confidence is to kind of tighten up here. We want to do this number right here. And a lot of times people's toes go down when they do that too. Okay, so I want you to keep your heels down. And when you start doing this, I tell people to exaggerate. I want you to bring your toes up off of those stirrups and push your heels down. It's going to feel like a stretch. It's not going to be super comfortable right off the bat. That's going to take a little bit of time to adjust into, but once those muscles develop and learn to stretch like that, then it's going to be much more comfortable and you're going to be a lot more balanced. So if you're like this, it's a lot harder to get your seat back and relax. If you put your heels down, suddenly you'll find that everything just kind of lines up a lot better through here, and it also puts you in a much better position when you're riding to be prepared for things. Okay, it doesn't tighten you up everywhere else, and I know I'm going to kind of keep emphasizing that, but it is very important. And if you're riding jumpers, you're going over fences or whatever, if you are standing on the balls of your feet like this, and it's so easy to have the tendency to do that if you're posting along, it's so easy to kind of start standing in the stirrups instead of dropping your weight into your heels like this. But what happens is when you go up to go to that fence, it almost turns your whole leg into a spring because of the tightness on that stirrup there. When you go over the fence and you go to land it, when you hit that thing, then it just kind of launches you right out of the saddle like that. So I think it's very important to get your weight and visualize the energy running down straight through your leg and out your heel and into the ground, okay? So think about that constant energy going down through there instead of stopping in the stirrups and kind of making that ground there, all right? All right, so my next tip is to always keep your legs against the horse's side. I see so many people riding around with their legs. There's so much space. Look how much space is between my legs and that horse. And oftentimes they have one of two answers when I ask them why that's happening. Either it's because they're afraid the horse is going to run off because legs mean so much to the horse that they can't even lay a leg on their horse without it moving off, or they say, my legs can't stretch like that. So my advice to you is to practice it. Get to where your legs naturally lay right against the horse. The reason this is so important is because not only does it give you much better balance, if you're out here all the time, look, you don't have much stability. If your legs are against the horse, you have a lot more stability. And another thing is, it looks way, way better in the show pen. So a lot of these tips that I'm giving you are really going to help you when you're showing horses and your overall presentation of how things look. If your legs are really close to the horse and you have to get the horse a cue, it's this much space, instead of being out here and you have to go all the way over here to make contact with the horse, okay? So we want things to be as subtle and as quiet and as pretty as possible in our overall presentation. So practice that, practice keeping your legs against the horse's side, and again, that's going to take some practice. It's going to take a lot of time for your muscles to develop in that way, but it is 100% worth it. All right, so number 4, we want to talk about keeping your reins centered. So much of the time, I see people riding around like this, or they'll come out to try a horse, or they're just riding around, and I say, hey, center your reins up. That's kind of confusing for your horse. And let me just show you this for a minute, okay? So if you're riding a horse that generally knows how to do a job, he knows how to neck rein or whatever, unless the horse is really, really manually broke, if your reins are centered up and you go to pull them this way, the first thing that happens is because it's so tight on the outside rein, I see this happen all the time, that horse gets put in a bind and he can't do what you want him to do. So not only is it correct and visually appealing, but it's much less confusing for you and your horse. So I would just say to fix that, just keep yourself accountable all the time. Think about that while you're riding. Think about where your hands are, what your reins are doing, pick them up, feel it, see if you can tell if the weight is symmetrical, check on it. If it's not, fix it and go back to riding, okay? Check on that constantly. If you're aware of something and you're starting to work on it, it's gonna become much more natural to you, and eventually it'll be second nature. You won't even have to think about it, and your reins are gonna be equal. They'll be centered 100% of the time, okay? So that just takes being aware of what's happening, all right? So the next tip is thumbs up, all right? I see a lot of people riding around like this with their hands flat, with their wrists broken, and they kind of do this thing, and they'll be going along, even as, you know, whether it's just training on a daily basis or riding in the warm-up pen or showing, and they have their hands flat like this, and they're kind of just doing this, and when they want to steer the horse, I see that wrist break over like this, and they do this whole thing, big chicken wing, and they'll go over here and keep riding around with their hands real flat. And for one, it's not a pretty picture, but another thing that it does is when you turn your arms like this, your elbows want to stick out too, all right? And we all know what happens when your elbows start sticking out, okay? So we don't want that to happen. I would say pay attention to that, keep your thumbs up when you're riding. That's kind of a general rule. And then you will see sometimes when we're guiding and steering, we'll reach out here and guide the horse across kind of flat-handed. But for the most part, when our hands are next to the horse's neck, step up here. I'm gonna have to do a little bit of training on this guy. There we go, he's being a good boy. When your hands are up next to the horse's neck, you don't want to be doing this number right here. You don't want to be breaking your wrist over like that. It's not a pretty picture. Again, this will improve your riding so dramatically if you can learn to keep your thumbs up. And again, bonus point, keep your elbows close to your side. I don't want to see you bracing on there, but it is a common problem for people to have where they want to bring their elbow out like this and kind of, you know, ride their elbow instead of actually keeping things really close and tight and comfortable. Good job. Easy, you can come back down now. Good boy. All right. And lastly, but definitely not least, and I know you've heard this tip hundreds of times, but I'm going to say it again just because this is important. I want you to look up, all right? And trainers are the worst for this. They'll tell every student to look up, and then you look over at them and they're there schooling, doing their thing, looking down at their horse, okay? But the biggest thing that trainers have an advantage in is that they stay usually pretty centered over their horse. So yeah, is this correct? No, it's still not correct. But what I don't like to see is when someone has their head pitched off to this side or this side, because our heads weigh like 15 to 20 pounds. And can you imagine trying to ride an exercise and wanting your horse to stay centered and stuff, and you're over here riding with an extra 20 pounds hanging off this side of your horse? Like, it just doesn't, it's not very biomechanically correct, and it doesn't look good in the show pen. And another reason I tell people to look up is because it makes such a huge difference in your presentation when you are showing. And I will tell you this, if you look like you're in control of what's happening and you're confident and you're looking across that pen and you're taking on the pattern, you're looking up like this, it gives off a much better look than if you're down focused on your horse. To the judges, what that looks like is that you're just about to lose control of what's happening there. Like you're just, I gotta train this horse, I gotta keep him in control, I gotta stay on top of this, otherwise everything might fall apart. So if you look completely nonchalant out there and you're just doing your pattern, it looks like you know everything's going to come together and you'll be fine. Anyway, guys, I hope these tips helped overall. If you put them together, they're going to definitely change your appearance in the show pen and how you present yourself and what the judges see. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time.